Good morning to everyone. I'm very pleased to introduce the Mario Gerla Symposium. This is a symposium to honor the memory and the work of Professor Mario Gerla. Mario has done pioneering work in network protocols and network systems. And so if today we are able to communicate over internet, it's also because of his work. So I remember very well when I was a student myself at the University of Pisa, we knew of Mario because his work, even though he was in the US, was very famous. And he was a role model for all our younger students. So he has been very successful, and his legacy will impact a generation of researchers. So we would like to thank the family of Professor Mario Gerla for making possible to have this award for young scientists in the field of computer science. So I would like to thank also the ISSNAF for all the organizational work, and Professor Ferdinando Fioretto for being a member of the jury. So at this point, we can start with the presentation, and we will proceed in alphabetic order. So I would like to ask Dr. Achille to start with the presentation.
Right away. So thank you for the introduction. Thank you for all the organizer for the workshop. Let me share my slides. Hope everyone can see it. Okay, so my plan for the next 15 minutes is to give an overview of our foundational research on the dynamics of information acquisition in deep networks and their application to large-scale problems in industry. Now, we're all aware, probably at this point, of the successes of deep learning. As we speak, we have larger and larger models that are trained on an equally large amount of data, and information is transformed and organized somewhere inside the model parameters. These models will then use this information to solve specific tasks, like image classification, or to generate new content in a way that routinely makes the headlines around the world. However, for a long time, there wasn't an actual big practical value in understanding how exactly this transformation of information happens. Practitioners could simply use the trained model and be content with the results. However, we're now at the turning point where it is critical to develop a finer understanding of the dynamics of information acquisition. Let me start by giving an example of this. Suppose that we train a model on a large collection of data from different sources, as in the case in most current large models. At the end of the training, we get a model and evaluate it. And in an academic setting, this will pretty much be the end of the story. In the real world, however, data is a mutable entity. New data is continually added, and just as easily, all data may at any point become unavailable. Let's say, for example, that for any reason, user B requests that their data is not used anymore inside of the model. Well, removing the data from storage is, of course, a pretty easy problem, but the information about the data also remains in the weights of the network. And the problem is that we don't know exactly where the information is inside of the model. Because of this, the simplest, and before our work, the only solution to this problem is to completely throw away the whole model and retrain a new one from scratch on the remaining data. Now, this is not desirable because it incurs a very high cost. So just consider the fact that training a current state-of-the-art large language model can cost upward to hundreds of millions of dollars just in compute alone. And moreover, even if training a new model were possible, the behavior of the new model may be very different from the behavior of the old model on some corner cases, and this could break compatibility with the user's pipeline. A better solution would instead be to understand where exactly the information is inside of the weights of the model, and scrub this information from the parameters without having to retrain the whole model. Doing this, however, requires a fine understanding of where information actually is inside of a deep network. And when we started our project in 2016, this was largely an unanswered question. Luckily, however, while machine learning was catching up, neuroscience had decades of insight into information acquisition in learning systems. And a good chunk of our understanding about development of perception in animals stems from the key studies by Hubel and Wiesel in the 60s. In particular, in one pivotal experiment, Hubel and Wiesel were able to show that cats that had an eye bandaged for a short period of 3 months after birth are then unable to learn to see from that eye, even after the occlusion is removed. That is, even if the eye was perfectly functioning after the bandage was removed, the brain just did not learn how to wire to the eye correctly unless it received stimuli from the eye during this initial period of development. Moreover, occluding the eye for longer periods of time leads to an increasingly worse loss of vision with a characteristic sigmoid plot that I'm showing here. Now, this experiment and many other experiments after it show that visual perception is not actually an innate ability of the brain, but a learned ability. Moreover, it shows that this ability can only be learned during a short period of 3 months during early development, which is referred to as a critical learning period. Now, while this is an extreme case, critical periods affect virtually all organisms and skills, ranging from, for example, second language acquisition in humans to, like, if you don't learn a language soon enough after birth, you don't get the same level of fluency as a native speaker, but also some learning in birth as critical periods, or children born with a lazy eye. If uncorrected, this could lead to a permanent blindness, which is actually something that could have happened to my brothers, which did have to wear that patch for a pretty long time. But now the existence of critical periods is tied to biochemical shifts during brain development that reduce neuron plasticity, making them less able to learn and process new information later in life. Given this, we don't actually expect the deep neural network to exhibit critical periods since they don't actually have any biochemical constraint. Surprisingly, however, we do find that deep neural networks suffer from critical periods. In particular, we replicated Hubel and Wiesel's experiment on deep networks. First, we trained a deep neural network on blurred images for a short period of time after initialization to simulate a weak eye after birth. Then we removed the blurring from the images and continued training with high resolution data. As the right plot shows, if the deficit is not removed early enough after birth, after the beginning of the training, the network ability to classify high-resolution images is permanently impaired, no matter how much additional training is provided. Moreover, the behavior of the network closely matches the corresponding behavior observed in animals. And this is actually a pretty robust observation, which has later been replicated consistently, both by us and by other teams, on different models, different tasks, different deficits, ranging from computer vision to natural language processing. But why exactly would a deep neural network, which has no biological components, exhibit critical learning periods remarkably similar to biological ones? Well, we showed that at the core, critical learning periods are actually a natural emerging property of deep learning systems. The effect of a critical period, in fact, becomes more dramatic as the depth of the network increases. And using our analytical models, we're able to show that their existence is largely independent of the actual architecture and mainly tied to the depth of the system. This suggests the intriguing hypothesis that critical periods may not exist in biological systems solely as a result of biochemical modulation, but may be a natural emerging property in any learning system. This, however, does not quite explain what concretely is happening inside the network that explains the existence of critical periods. For that, we need to turn to the core property of learning in both artificial and biological systems, which is information acquisition. You may expect that during training, a deep neural network acquires information from data in a monotonic way, starting from zero information at the beginning and then slowly increasing up to some final value as it sees more training data. This, however, is not what actually happens. A deep network first rapidly acquires information about the task to solve, but then spends most of the actual training time removing redundant information while improving its accuracy. Somewhat counterintuitively, we show both theoretically and empirically that this forgetting phase is actually highly beneficial for a deep network and leads both to better generalization and to learning more invariant representations of the data, which are robust to nuisance variability. We also show that critical periods happen exactly during this initial learning and forgetting phase. In particular, changes to the data before or after this phase do not significantly change the network performance. However, even a small deficit during the critical phase can lead to dramatic permanent impairment later on. Now, this behavior actually has an intuitive geometric interpretation in terms of crossing of irreversible bottlenecks in the loss landscape. Now, when training a network, we usually train following the gradient descent direction in order to minimize the training loss, thus tracing a path in the loss landscape starting from a random initialization to a minimizer of the loss function. Now, we observe empirically that in order to learn a task, a deep network has to first enter a narrow passage in the loss landscape, which will largely determine the structure of the final solution. And after that, the network merely makes the solution more efficient. If, however, a deficit occurs before entering the right bottleneck, the network may then converge to a different solution that is optimal for the corrupted data, but is incompatible with the real data. At that point, even if the network is exposed to the correct data, it is unlikely to be able to exit the wrong bottleneck and re-enter the correct one. Which largely justifies our measurements. Now, aside from elucidating how networks converge to efficient and low complexity solutions during the initial training, this has profound implications for the problem of forgetting. So to recap, machine learning is the problem of removing information about particular examples from the weights of the network without having to retrain the network from scratch. And the core idea to do this is actually quite simple. Suppose that you want to remove the influence of an image from a trained network. This means that we want to make the network identical to one trained without that example. Now, consider the path traced by the parameters of the network during training. At some point during training, the network will first encounter the image that we want to forget. After that point, the training path of a network trained with or without that image will start to diverge and will arrive at two different solutions. The core idea of unlearning is that we want to approximate the perturbation of the parameters of the network that will allow us to jump from one solution to the other without having to retrace the whole training path. Now, the snag is that critical periods are actually going to prevent us from doing that. Suppose that, for example, the sample that we want to forget is encountered during the critical period phase, before the network centered the correct bottleneck. The two paths may then diverge in complex and unpredictable ways due to the highly non-convex loss landscape, and this makes it impossible to compute a simple perturbation that removes the influence of the example. If, on the other hand, the sample is seen after the end of the critical period, then the problem will become much easier. So this inspired the development of mixed privacy forgetting, which is currently one of the state-of-the-art methods for machine learning in deep networks. The first intuition is that in the real world, not all data is equal. Some fraction of the data is what we may call safe data, in the sense that it is unlikely to require forgetting, for example, because it comes from a public source. Other data is unsafe, meaning that it's at a much higher risk of receiving a forgetting request. Since the safe data does not require forgetting, we can use it to perform the initial training and cross over the critical period. And after the critical period has been cleared, we can train the network on the unsafe data, thus making forgetting it relatively easier. A further advantage of this strategy is that the loss landscape becomes much more regular after the end of the critical period, and we can exploit this by introducing a linearized approximation of the network behavior, which allows us to estimate the correct forgetting perturbation. So this approach has proved effective in large-scale vision system. And moreover, even if I'm not going to go into details here, we can actually provide a theoretical upper bound on how much information remains in the parameter of the network about the samples that we wanted to forget after the forgetting procedure has been applied. Now, what I showed is in high detail, at a very high level, only one particular work. But after introducing the problem of forgetting in deep neural networks in 2019, we have developed a number of different theoretical and practical methods for forgetting in large-scale models, also working in close collaboration with both legal experts and differential privacy experts. We have also been happy to see that after its inception, the topic has steadily grown in popularity with the community as more and more people become aware of the importance of forgetting and actually deploying real-world large-scale systems. Forgetting is one application of our foundational research on the dynamics of information acquisition, but there are other directions that I'm also excited about, which I'm unable to cover in details due to time constraints. However, one thing that I would like to highlight is that critical periods are also deeply connected with the problem of transfer learning, in particular with defining a notion of distance between learning tasks that can tell us how difficult it is for a network to learn a new task after having trained on another one. This is a pivotal problem in AutoML, where we have to select the best starting model to use to solve a user task. Using our theory, we developed task2vec, which is a method to compute a distance between learning tasks that can be used for model selection. This method has found application in large-scale production systems, for example, in the Amazon custom label AutoML service. Now, I hope that with this presentation, I show you that we now have both the tools and the need to study the dynamics of information acquisition in deep systems. This opens the door for a lot of exciting opportunities. For example, I like to think of a future in which we have a better understanding of critical periods in both artificial and biological systems, and in which we can use these tools to overcome learning limitations, for example, developing better methods for second language learning, or to improve any other skill at any point in life. Or I like to think of a future where we can easily add or remove information from deep learning systems with trillions of parameters without having to spend millions of dollars in order to retrain them from scratch. And another topic that I deeply care about is understanding the influence of specific training example on the final model in order to respect and preserve intellectual properties of those examples. Now, with this said, I want to thank you all my collaborators. In particular, I want to put a spotlight on my younger collaborators, without which this work wouldn't be possible. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for the interesting presentation. I would like to mention that Professor Anna Squicciarini, who is a member of the jury, also joined the presentation, the symposium. So I like to ask Professor Nando Fioretto to start with a question.
Yeah, so thank you, Alessandra. This was a really interesting presentation and a very nice work. I guess I have a couple of questions, mostly related on how do you evaluate whether a sample can actually be forgotten, right? So say that you have a LLM and then you want to remove a sample, which was your motivation at the beginning. So how do you actually evaluate? And this is related, and maybe you can answer, more exhaustively to also the bound that you showed. How tight is that bound?
Yes, there are basically three different ways in which these methods can be evaluated. Methods which have a very strong set of hypotheses, for example, assuming that the model is convex, can actually have a strong theoretical bounds with ensure that when the method is applied, we will always get that level of forgetting. This is the style of bound that I presented shortly in that slide. In that case, we use an hybrid system where we do the final part of the training by linearizing the network, which makes the problem convex, and we can actually write a strong bound. And we developed this linearization method, which we call linear quadratic fine-tuning, which allows to retain the high performance of the network while gaining convexity. If the network is not convex, then we lose the theoretical a priori bounds, but we can still compute the a posteriori performance of the algorithm. There are two ways to do this. One is that we actually follow the definition. So we have these two training paths. We could simulate them both, and we could evaluate how distant the weights after forgetting are from the target set of weights. This is, of course, expensive and defies the whole purpose, but can be used to evaluate how good the algorithm is before deploying it in production. The third bound, the third weight measure is to use what we call readout functions. So readout functions is something like the confidence of the network on the forgotten samples, or the error rate, or some scalar like that. And we can check that after forgetting, all these readout functions have the same value on both the model originally trained without that example and the model after the scrubbing procedure has been applied.
Okay, thank you. I have more questions, but I think we are tight in time, so I'll retain them.
Anna, do you have any questions?
I don't. So if you want to ask another question, feel free, because I joined a little late, so I don't have a question right now.
I'll take your spot and ask just an opinion question. What do you think? Would you think it's possible then, given your explanation of your theory, to apply such type of forgetting in context?
Sorry, in which context?
In context learning.
In context learning.
No, context. So
in
context learning is
in context learning. Sorry. Yes. Okay. In context learning. So yeah, we actually discuss kind of the taxonomy of the different ways in which we can do forgetting in this position paper, model discouragement, methods and choices. So there are actually a lot of competing methods that can be applied for forgetting. Another one is to modify the architecture of the system to kind of compartmentalize the information coming from different sources in different subset of the parameters, so that if a sample is removed, only a subset of the parameters need to be retrained. That is very competitive on big systems. Coming from in context learning, the other very good way to do forgetting is to just not put the information inside the weights to start with, and put the information on external data storage, and then allow the network to retrieve the information at inference time and add that information to the prompt of the model. Now, this kind of retrieval augmented generation of the answers is becoming increasingly popular, and we've also early on suggested that this would be a good way to do forgetting. And because you don't need to change the model at all, you just need to literally remove from the drive the sample. Now, regarding my opinion, I think that it will require a combination of all these efforts. You do need retrieval augmented because it's the most flexible and easy. You need to compartmentalization because it's the most scalable and expressive. And you need what I explained here, which is removing information from the parameters, because even if you compartmentalize, you still need to scribe these submodels from the information.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, I have a quick question. This is perhaps more practical question. So, but in general, one may want to forget not a single example, but I may say, for example, especially when I have used a huge data set, I may want to forget many samples. So can one do this quickly and efficiently, or I have to forget one sample at a time?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So all the forgetting methods should be designed to handle multiple examples at the same time. If not, this is just going to be differential privacy in some, I mean, it's not going to be differential privacy, but it's going to be similar. If I reduce the influence of each individual sample, then I forget it for free and it becomes a privacy problem. The important thing is that forgetting allows a group removal with much better conditions to differential privacy. So, for example, in the bounds that I express here, the ratio to forget is actually the fraction of samples that we want to remove compared to the total size of the data set. And what this shows is that indeed removing more samples is going to become more difficult. Now, there are, however, some things that we want to consider in practice. Also going back to this compartmentalization question. So, actually, let me take this slide. So if we already know that we have data from different data sources, A, B, and C, which may have different licenses, different problems, and so on, what we can do is to create a subset of the parameters of the model which only has information about that particular data source. If now it happens that I want to remove all the information coming from the same data source, then I can simply drop that whole set of parameters and I'm done. I don't actually even need to do forgetting. So the smart practitioners would try to compartmentalize the problem in such a way that if any large forgetting request arrives, it's mainly limited to one single cluster, and so I can completely drop that set of parameters and have a super efficient solution.
Yeah, but because I had in mind the different problem, the differential privacy, because the differential privacy, everyone. So there is this problem that the larger language models are used to generate code. And they are trained on GitHub repositories. And they end up generating code which has a lot of vulnerabilities. So the problem could be that how do I, work so that I know which results are wrong, but sometimes I may not really know exactly which are the data sources which generated the result. So is there a way that one can support this type of applications easily?
Right, so I guess that, again, if someone tells me which samples not to trust or which we later discover are corrupted or mislabeled or whatever, then we can definitely try to forget that group of examples. Now, going back to the bound, I guess that in the case of GitHub, that samples will be a small percentage of the total training sample. So this ratio to forget will be small enough that we don't actually care removing one sample or 10 or 100. Basically the same at the scale. And I think not considering this bound is that if the samples are correlated, because they kind of make the same mistake, it's much easier to forget all of them at the same time because of this correlation. So it will further improve this bound.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so we can move to the next presentation by Dr. Giulia Guidi.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, awesome. Can I just go? Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Giulia Guidi. I'm a new assistant professor at Cornell University. And my research is broadly speaking in high-performance computing and parallel computing. And today I just want to talk a little bit about the effort in my research of trying to make science application more scalable through the use of high-performance abstraction. And I guess I want to start today letting you know why I'm so excited about parallel computing. I come from an engineering background, and what I really like about high performance computing that you have applications everywhere. So this kind of allows me to keep learning different things from different applications and be useful to different fields, which is something that I really, really like. The fact that I'm continuously pushed to learn new things and be useful in different scenarios. And you can imagine applications in climate change, for example, and climate modeling, in genomics and biology, which is a field where I do focus a lot of my attention, You can imagine robotics and reinforcement learning, neurosciences, video games, which is, where, if you can remember, like GPUs were really the reason why they were created initially. And for example, material sciences and physics. There are just really applications everywhere. And this is something that I found extremely excited about this field. And the other reason is that I think that it really matters. Like, sometimes somebody could feel that, high performance computing is about, going faster, getting your code going faster. And that's really it. But it's not just about, telling your friend that, your code is 10 times faster, but like being able to reduce the runtime for certain application, it's really, really critical for the outcome. Like this is an example from Eric Topol, that is the director of the Script Institute in San Diego. And this is a work in collaboration with Stanford and Santa Cruz. And what they did here is to use GPUs, so like parallel computing, and in particular GPUs in this case, to accelerate the diagnosis for critically ill patients. So they analyze the DNA of these people and arrive to a diagnosis under 8 hours. And what's critical, what's important here is the critically ill patient. So the fact that they were able to reduce the runtime and get the diagnosis under 8 hours, it really matters for the outcome. So it's not just about saving resources, but it's really about like the outcome for sciences sometimes. And what I find extremely exciting is that if a lot of people, when they think about high performance computing, they think about this, large scale simulations like in physics and climate modeling, which is, extremely like interesting. But I think that today high performance computing is so much more. And I think high performance computing is getting a new dawn from like similar to what we have seen like, with the rise of machine learning. So like we have many more data. Like in the past few years, people just became like, we just got so much better at generating data. And so this means that we can achieve big volume of data. And thanks to this volume of data, we can have many more applications. So this is an example for the cost of sequencing the human genome, where we have the cost on the y-axis and the years on the x-axis. And basically what we have here is that in the past few years, it became significantly cheaper. And so people just started to generate more data. And the reality is that since we have more data, like using like a laptop or a single CPU server is not that useful anymore to analyze this data, because it might take too long and you might just need the results to get the results faster, or sometimes your data cannot even fit on a single server and you might need to scale it up to like multiple for example CPUs or GPUs. And it's not just about the volume of data, but it's about the type of applications that we can do with this data. And so you can imagine that as we get more data, we can do more things with this data. So there are like a lot of applications that are exciting in, around the human health, but specifically for genomics and biology, it's not just about the human health per se, but it goes into other aspects of human lives, like biofuel production and agriculture. And so these are all reasons that I'm extremely excited about this field and kind of working at the intersection of high performance computing and computational sciences. So this is all exciting, but at the same time, we are seeing kind of like some big challenges on the high performance computing side. And as all of like Moore's law is ending. And so until now, we kind of got kind of performance for free from like newer hardware, but that's really not the case anymore. And so the way, on the computer science side, we are dealing with this is coming up with like newer architecture and highly powered architecture. So we start to see like GPUs, FPGAs, different programming models for programming this type of hardware, different programming languages to make it a little bit easier. So it just like the space of like kind of like programming, and especially like high performance computing programming, just increased a lot. And this poses a big challenge because what we can imagine is basically having like on one side of the equation, on the left side in this case, a lot of new application and sciences that do need to use a large amount of data and would benefit from high performance and large scale computing. But then at the same time, we have this kind of like bottleneck that is like shrinking because we have many more complexity that we need to like go around in order to achieve the performance. because we need to deal with heterogeneous hardware and how to use that hardware efficiently. And you can ask any person that have taken like a parallel computing class. Parallel programming is really hard. It's like not super intuitive if you never thought about it, and so it just requires you to think in a completely different way. And so it's just extremely hard to move from the application space to like high performance code. And so this basically, this is just like more and more application that that would really need high performance computing resources. But the result is that we are not, right now very happy with the amount of scientific progress that we can deal with, because there's just not enough HPC, quote unquote, expertise out there to be able to satisfy the demand. And so a lot of my research is about looking at high performance abstraction in order to kind of like widen and kind of like lighten up this kind of bottleneck and being able to move faster from application to high performance solution. And a lot of my research so far has been focusing on particularly graphs and sparse matrices. You probably know that sparse matrices and graphs are duals. And so, and a lot of application in sciences do look like a graph or do look like a network that you can map on sparse matrices. And so a lot of my work is to map application on sparse matrices and then kind of like work at the optimization and parallelism level from the sparse matrices perspective. Like you can imagine something similar happen in like deep learning. Like people realize, especially early days, that deep learning is just a lot of dense matrix multiply, and they just ended up optimizing like very heavily the whole stack for that matrix multiply. And so what I want to do here is like having something similar, but in a context where you have a very variegated applications, and most of these applications are highly irregular, so they do not actually match on like a nice structure like dense matrix multiply. And so now I just want to give like a quick example of like a problem I've worked on and how this map on sparse matrices, and then I'll just wrap up with some quick results. The novel assembly problem is like a very important biology pipeline. And the idea is that when we sequence the genome, like machines that we have right now are not able to like sequence the whole genome in a single row, in a single run. So what they do is like just read very small pieces of our DNA. So you can imagine that it's like assembling a puzzle, but without knowing the reference. It's like somebody enters in the room, but if we imagine us being in a room all together, somebody enters in a room with a puzzle, it drops it on the floor, it's a huge puzzle, and then it leaves with the box. So we are left here and we don't know if you're trying to reconstruct a cat, a dog, or something else. And these puzzle pieces are extremely small and contain errors. In the past few years, like the error rate did go down quite a lot, from like 30-35% to like down to like 0.5. The reality is that 0.5 still creates issues, unfortunately. And then we have one more complexity, which is the fact that genomes have repetitive regions. So it's like half of this puzzle or 1/3 of this puzzle is a blue sky. So when we have like blue pieces, it's just going to be very hard for us to know exactly where to place it in the puzzle. So these are all like things that make it very challenging. And how this problem, like the type of like paradigm that it's used to solve this problem is basically first look for very small matches between these sequences. So you can imagine this like colorful rectangulars to be like sequences, and then these kind of I guess like very pink like small parts to be like what we can call K-mer matches. And so the idea is like just trying to find small overlap pairwise between different sequences, and then in the layout phase, try to just piece these pieces together and try to form something, and then eventually get a consensus out of it. This is kind of just a little bit the runtimes that we currently have for shared memory software. So these are software that do use some parallelism on a single CPU. And if you're dealing with a bacterium, you probably do not want to use like high performance computing. It's probably fine. But as you go into mammalian genomes, and even more so for plant genomes, which are way bigger usually than human genomes, then the runtime can get pretty bad, especially if you consider that usually these operations are done multiple times. It's not just like a one-time thing. And so the goal here is like try to make this faster. And so one could think, okay, let's just take this, parallel shared memory algorithm and map them onto distributed memory. The reality is that distributed memory is parallelism is way harder than shared memory parallelism, and it just doesn't map one-on-one. So it's a different way of thinking about the parallelism when you move from one server to multiple server. And it's particularly tricky when you have to deal with irregular data structure and irregular shared memory parallelism. And so it just requires a complete different way of thinking about the problem that doesn't make it easier to just move from one server to like 4, 10, or like 100. And so the way we approach this is by using linear algebra. And what happens here is that ELBA is the name of the software that we implemented for long read assembly. And in ELBA, we just see the whole problem as a series of sparse matrix operations. And so the core data structure is a sparse matrix when you usually have hash tables and other type of structure that are used. And the advantage here is that so basically we can have better algorithm flexibility and modularity. And I'm happy to kind of explain more what I mean by this later for the questions. But one key advantage is also that the fact that from high performance computing, we know how to parallelize sparse matrix operations. And so the parallelism kind of comes naturally from being able to map this problem onto this abstraction. And I think that that's just something very helpful and that improves the programmer productivity a lot. So I'm just going to give a quick example of what the overlap detection looks like. So basically, the first phase is k-mer counting, which is basically we just extract these very short matches that we're going to use to match pair of sequences. And this k-mer counting comes in a form of hash table. This is actually a distributed hash table. So each processor, each server does have a piece of the hash table. And this hash table have this short match, k-mer match as key. And the value is how many times this match is in the data set and from which reads or sequences it comes from. And so what we do here is that we move into the space of sparse matrices. So now we have a k-mer by sequences or by reads matrix, which is this time distributed 2D. So each processor does have a subset of k-mers and reads. And a non-zero is telling us that that k-mer exists in that sequence. And so now we kind of enter in the space of sparse matrices and we kind of do not exit until we are done with the whole computation. And the way we find matches is by taking this reads by k-mer matrix, where the non-zero is not just the k-mer belongs to that read, but also on which position of the sequence of the read we do find that k-mer. So in this case, k-mer 2 starts at position 16 on read 3. And we know the end position because k-mers are fixed length. And so what we do is that we multiply A by A transpose. So we have a sequence by k-mer matrix and a k-mer by sequence matrix, and we want to obtain a sequence by sequence matrix where each non-zero is telling us that they have something in common. And so we do this using sparse matrix multiply. And if we just look at an example, for example, the second row from A and the third column from A transpose, and we apply this matrix multiply, what we obtain in the final output, in the final matrix for CR2 or 3 is this 537. So the good news is that at this point, the output matrix, it's telling us that R2 and R3 do have something in common, and that's great. The problem is that we are losing a lot of information because this 537 means absolutely nothing, biologically speaking. And so what we do instead, we use this concept that's called Symering abstraction from, it's like an algebraic concept. And what we do with Symering is basically we can overload the set of operation that we apply during matrix multiply. So instead of doing add and multiply, we can do whatever we want. And this also means that the data structure of our matrices can also be whatever we want. They don't have to be the same for input and output. The two input can be different as long as we deal with it correctly in the Symering. And so what we do here instead of multiplying the two numbers, we just make a pair and store it because we want to retain the information of where this k-mer 1 that is common between the two reads starts on the two reads. And the addition just becomes a concatenate. So we store multiple pairs of k-mers. And so this is kind of what we obtain in the end, where we have this sequence by sequence metrics, but not only we know that they have something common, we also have this sort of like representation of the overlap that is very useful to build the graph. And the good news about this is that we are able to reduce the runtime by a lot. So we can process the human genome in under 20 minutes, like on 17 minutes on this machine. And this is just kind of like some scaling. You know, like in parallel computing, we like to look at this just to basically showing that we are utilizing the resources efficiently. So ideally, we want to be as close to the, you know, as the trend should be as similar to the black line as possible. And this is pretty close. So this is like around, I think 85 or 90%. So this is, we are utilizing all these resources pretty efficiently. And this is a comparison between ALBA and Dibala 1D, which is a previous version that we did using distributed hash table of this problem. And the cool things here is not really shown. I mean, we are about 2 times faster, which is great. But the really cool things is that it took us to develop the core algorithm in ALBA significantly less time than Dibala 1D, because using the sparse matrix abstraction, we knew how to map, how to extract the parallelism efficiently. Like ALBA was 1 or 2 months effort, you know, the core design, and Dibala 1D was basically a PhD thesis. So it just was like a very different amount of effort, just because the parallelization was very easy to see using matrices. And here are just some results. Yeah, I'm done. I can just, you know, skip over this. This is just a cool picture of what it looks like after the first step. And then, you know, you want to end up with something that looks more like a genome. And, you know, the key takeaway that I would like you to take from this presentation is that if we can map applications onto the right abstraction, this can simplify the parallel programming task like by quite a lot. And this creates like highly efficient and like codes for the machine, but also very productive way of writing parallel programs. So I'm happy to take any questions. I do have a few slides for shout out to my, you know, amazing students, but they know they're amazing. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the presentation. So Anna, do you want to start asking a question?
Sure. I guess a question I was asking myself is, you mentioned there are multiple abstractions that could be used.
Yeah.
And what is the reasoning that usually go in attempting one abstractions over the other? Is there like a systematic approach, or are there some data structures that lead naturally towards some or others?
Yeah, so when we talk about the abstraction at the beginning, so this is a work that we did a few years ago, and basically this is a set of like data structure and like kind of patterns that comes up over and over again in genomics, which is what we were focusing on. In particular, what I'm interested in right now is really looking at the sparse matrix abstraction, because it does map extremely well on graphs and networks that they do come up in a lot of like scientific application. So I think that like there are other, like for example, generalized embody is what we did with like distributed hash tables. And I think that there, like, you know, you might not be able to map sparse matrix abstraction on anything, but what I've been really focusing on is looking at this abstraction, the similar way that, like, you know, in deep learning, you have dense matrix to do a lot of things. So right now I'm more interested in trying to see how far I can push the sparse matrix abstraction rather than kind of like span too much around abstraction, because what I would really like to see is, you know, application mapped onto the sparse matrix abstraction, so like we can optimize kind of like this process kind of like on the application and user level, and then on the system and hardware level, focusing on how we can you know, exploit this a little bit of structure that the sparse matrix puts on the computation to optimize the system and the parallelism. So right now I'm kind of more interested in kind of like, you know, go vertical on this abstraction rather than span across multiple ones.
Thank you. That was a very nice question and reply. Nando, do you have questions?
Yeah, actually, I had a similar question in mind to what Anna had. Maybe just a follow-up on that question. Do you then see any hope for automatically mapping those, you know, problems to the right abstractions?
So that's a very good question. So I think that like there is, and that's one of the reasons why I actually really like, you know, the aspect of teaching, because I hope that like with teaching I can mold a little bit, you know, students into thinking about the problem in this way. So I think that there is like hope, because graph maps very well onto sparse matrices. So I think that like if we can find a way of just like give a few instruction, like it does seems extremely okay, I'm not gonna say straightforward, because every time I say something is straightforward, it's actually not. But I think that there is definitely hope to map applications onto this abstraction in an automatic way. Something that like we are working a lot with a PhD student of mine right now is kind of like the lower level aspect, which is like, if we have this abstraction, how do we map, you know, the parallelism automatically on the server based on, you know, different hardware that you might have available. So I think that the question of automation is extremely important. And, you know, ideally what I would like to see at some point is like something exactly like fully automatic, where the user can just write some specification and then, you know, the whole pipeline will be mapped. I kind of want to stay away from the DSL aspect. Like I do not want to restrict the user too much to the set of operation they want to do. And I would like to see this approach mapped to like different applications and different domains, so not necessarily like one domain. So I definitely think there is hope for automation, as long as we find a way of doing that without asking for too specific restriction from the user.
Thank you. I have a very quick question, but maybe it's kind of naive. So since, you know, there is this quantum computing paradigm, so I wonder what would happen to the entire area of parallel computing. I mean, will be the same, will change, will not be relevant any longer. Can you say something on this?
Yeah, I think, you know, this might be a totally biased opinion, but I think that like quantum computing will, the way I see it is, I think that like quantum computing will be seen as a sort of like accelerator that will be incorporated into the more traditional parallel computing. That's kind of my prediction. Like, I don't know if in the, you know, medium term, we will be able to see, you know, large scale quantum, like fully quantum computers. But I definitely think that there is like hope and like evidence for having quantum computers has accelerators, like, you know, next to a GPUs or like an FPGA. So I think it will be like part of parallel computing, and, you know, will be just one more complexity that, you know, HPC will have to deal with, rather than, you know, a threat of being, you know, going out of trend.
Yeah, no, I agree. This is also what I think, but sometimes I feel that the algorithm will be so different because of quantum computing. Therefore, it will impact the use of the rest of the more conventional architectures.
I think, like, you know, I think it's possible. I think that like we already kind of see, I mean, like, you know, like definitely like quantum programming is going to be way different than, you know, more different than, you know, CPU programming than GPU programming is to CPU programming. But we already kind of see this kind of like different parallel programming, like different programming models and programming like models for different architecture that already kind of force the, you know, the programmer to think about how to like deal with all of this. So I really think that it will be, you know, maybe like a harder exercise, but a similar exercise to what we are already doing with GPUs and FPGAs, which is like how, or like, you know, AI hardware. Like I've done some recent work on graph core IPUs, because kind of the question was like, okay, GPUs were, you know, were just for gaming, and now they are for everything. And now we have this AI hardware that is for AI. Can we use this AI hardware for, you know, more stuff? And this again adds more parallel programming models that people have to deal with. So I think that it will be one more challenge, but I don't think that like as of now there, like I have enough evidence to think that, you know, traditional computing will go away.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. But that's, we'll have this discussion in 10 years.
No, I mean, like, I love that. I mean, like, I think that actually, like, when I applied for faculty, I did mention quantum accelerators and quantum computing as, an area of research, for high performance computing.
Yeah, thanks. So now we have the last but not the least, Dr. Paolini.
Yes.
Giovanni Paolini. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
I take over the screen.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yes, we can see the screen.
Okay, fantastic. So can I start?
Please start.
Okay. So thank you very much for the invitation. In this last talk, I will say something which I titled There and Back Again, A Tale of Mathematics and Generative AI. This is due to my background, which starts in pure mathematics. This is the main my main area of study during my PhD, and there I was interested. I have been interested in several problems in a few different areas of pure mathematics. I put here some pictures to give you some a flavor of the objects that I'm interested in. So lots of geometry and topology, and in particular a work that I did, which was published a few years ago, is a proof of the K-pi1 conjecture for the so-called affine case. So the statement of the conjecture is here. It is a conjecture about the topology of complements of hyperplanes that are placed in a symmetric way in the complex space. And this result earned me and my advisor nice letter by fields medalist Pierre Deligne that named this beautiful theorem. So this is the kind of things that I'm interested in pure mathematics, and I have been working on related topics ever since. But I also, during my PhD, I also started becoming more and more interested in machine learning, and I made a big switch of career around 4 years ago. I joined AWS and Caltech, and I started working on machine learning, and in particular, I devoted most of my time to natural language processing, particularly to language models. Language models are well known to many of us, but the starting idea or problem that language models solve is actually pretty simple. The problem of language modeling is perhaps the core problem of natural language processing, and it consists of building a model of natural language text. So basically a model, say a machine learning model, that is able to accurately predict what's the next word that is going to appear in a sentence or in a text. Now with the generative AI, which has become popular very recently, we know that language models allow us to do a lot of things, not just predict the next word in a book. And I started working on doing more than just language modeling with language models. Sometime before generative AI became extremely popular with GPT-3 and ChatGPT. And in particular, in a work that I did, my co-authors and I, we showed that you can actually use language models to solve structured prediction tasks, where basically you don't want to just predict the next word or generate text. you want to extract information from existing text. So for example, imagine that your AI system is parsing a Wikipedia page about Tolkien writing The Lord of the Rings. Then you might be interested in extracting, for example, the fact that Tolkien is a person, The Lord of the Rings is a book, and place those as nodes in a graph, in a knowledge graph, and connect them with a relation, for example, the relation of being author of a book. And there are plenty of tasks that fall in this kind of realm. You can extract all sorts of things from text. So what we did was to develop a model, a generative model based off a language model, which basically is able to solve all these problems by framing them as predicting the next word, essentially by introducing or inventing an augmented language, which we teach the model. So the model is then tasked to just translate between, say, the natural language, which it is used to this augmented language that then easily allows us to extract whatever information we are interested in. And this is useful, first of all, because it works, but second, because it greatly simplifies the way we can do information extraction, because traditionally people would design the neural network architecture specifically for the type of structure prediction task that was of interest. And instead we show that you can actually take an existing language model architecture and just use that as it is. And this also, to some extent, this is also what's been happening more recently with generative AI. So we have been discovering that language models can do a lot of things. So not just generate the next word. If language models are tuned in the appropriate way, you can use them for even general purpose assistance, as we have seen with ChatGPT, the most revolutionary example of this. And in fact, while at AWS, I moved to basically I worked on generative models, on large language models, and I was on the team that develops Amazon's generative AI service, which is called Bedrock. And I have been interested in this process or problem called AI alignment, which I briefly mentioned already, which is the problem of taking a language model and making it usable not just to predict the next word, but to actually solve tasks that people can be interested in. Okay, and the way this task is typically framed is to make a language model helpful and harmless for people to use. You can think of it as tuning a language model so that it follows Asimov's laws of robotics. Now, about a month ago, I actually shifted my career again. I have kept my interest in pure mathematics. I'm now back to a fully academic position at the University of Bologna. And while I intend to keep working on pure mathematics, on language modeling, there is a very, very attractive problem at the intersection of the two that I'm looking at. And this is applications of AI to mathematics. So generative AI is widely recognized as a potential turning point for research in all areas of mathematics, and it might bring huge change. For example, with automated theorem proving, which is the task of having AI automatically find proofs to formal mathematical statements, and formalization, which is the task of taking the existing mathematics, existing theorems, and translating them into formal mathematics, which can be automatically verified with computers. And the fact that we are at a turning point is, as I said, it is believed by very important people. I put here a quote by another Fields medalist, Terence Tao, probably one of the greatest mathematicians of our time, who expects that in a few years, AI will probably become a trustworthy co-author in mathematical research. So it is a revolution that is likely going to happen. We don't know exactly the time frame. A lot of work has been happening already. And for me, the key question, so going back to my interests in machine learning, which are mostly on language models, the key question for me is how do we best adapt language models to perform complex mathematical reasoning, to help us do mathematics in a variety of possible meanings of this sentence. And in my view, the way I want to tackle this and the way we will do it is to view this as improving AI language models in particular, so that they can cooperate and interact with three other key players. So I don't, AI is not going to do all the work by itself. The first, additional player in this game is given by theorem provers, which are both programming languages and softwares that are able to parse for mathematics written in the formal language and to check that all the proofs are correct. So what I'm envisioning is that AI would be able to effectively interact with the theorem provers in the way that right now we see ChatGPT interact with the tools, like to book a flight or to search the internet. Next, especially important for formalizing existing mathematics, I envision language models that are capable to look up math literature and to be able to parse the way mathematicians write mathematics in natural language. So one might think that mathematics in papers is written in a formal way. To some extent, that's correct. So mathematical proofs are supposed to be, ultimate proof that the statement is correct. But there is actually a long way between informal mathematics as written by mathematicians and fully formal mathematics as a theorem prover could parse. So basically, we have current AI, which is extremely good at natural language. We have formal mathematics, which is what theorem provers can handle, and we have the math literature, which, by the way, AI is already trained on, but it is not yet very capable of handling. We have the informal language that mathematicians use to write mathematics. And finally, in my opinion, the most interesting applications will come with interactions with mathematicians. So in the same way that today we have AI alignment, which promotes a language model to an assistant, a general purpose assistant to perform tasks in natural language. I do believe that it is possible to enhance this alignment process so that the interaction with mathematicians becomes meaningful. Because today, if a mathematician talks with ChatGPT about mathematics, it's kind of a joke. It's a source of many funny examples where ChatGPT just doesn't understand what it's talking about. But I do think we might be on the right track, in the sense that improving the way we do alignment might help us obtain an AI which can be a useful assistant to a mathematician. So basically, we want language models to be able to, speak all these languages and interact with your improvers and possibly other tools. For example, being able to perform computations that mathematicians perhaps write programs for. And I'm really excited about this direction. I started thinking about it. I think one way or another, this will be a big part of the future of mathematics. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps I'll start with a quick question myself. Actually, this is what you presented is very interesting, and I have the following problem with my research team. We do a lot of analysis of cellular network protocols, like for 5G. Those are very complicated protocols, and we use a model checking or cryptographic verifiers. However, one problem is that those tools require a formal specification of the protocol. And for us, extracting those formal specifications from the standardization document is very expensive, because those are written in natural language, are very long, a lot of... So indeed, I was thinking to use techniques from language translations. But do you think that, is a problem that one can have tools that can use? Because I needed to translate from an informal, let's say, description to a formal language, which in our case is find state machines or automata, for example. So do you have any pointer or something that can be used in your view?
So this is related to several things that I mentioned in this talk. I think the way generative AI is developing right now is going into the direction where one can interface with formal systems by giving specifications in natural language. And this interaction is made possible through alignment, in the same way as ChatGPT, as I mentioned before, talks with travel agents in an automatic way. So in the specific case, so we are going in the general direction where this kind of applications will become more and more possible. Now, depending on how technical the specific application is, it might or might not be required to tune the model, say, a large language model, so that it sees more of the specific application that we're talking about.
Okay.
And there are other examples. So coding is another example. Coding is wide enough. There is enough data about coding that language models, today's language models are already very good at it. Mathematics is not quite there, so there is comparatively insufficient data for language models to learn the language of mathematics in a useful way. And yeah, your specific application might fall anywhere between these examples, depending on how much, how close it is to something that already exists in that has been seen a lot, how much data there is, and so on.
Okay, thanks. And Anna and Nando, do you have any question?
Maybe I can ask a question. I think that it's also related with the previous question by Elisa. The language models generally generative AI processes are probabilistic, so they are pretty fast in giving us replies. And here is a really nice endeavor what you want to do, what you explain in in the last slide. But inevitably there is this challenge, right? When you're generating something, that something comes with no guarantee whatsoever from the AI model, the LLM. In this particular case, the verification step, it's indeed the most computationally expensive one, right? And in your case, I mean, you're interacting with theorem provers, so they're typically solving NP-hard problems, and you're going to have this type of interactions that is a system which is really fast with a system which is extremely slow, and probably the fast system needs to generate an enormous amount of answers that needs to be verified by the theorem prover. So how would you plan to reconcile this type of challenge, which I think are going to rise?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So fortunately, things are not quite so bad, in the sense that it is true that theorem provers can be given under-specified proofs that then they would try to verify, and that would most likely be NP-hard. But more practical for mathematicians is that if your AI system is able to write a potential formal proof in the formal language that the theorem prover can read, the theorem prover can parse this and check whether the proof is correct, and it's very fast. It does not require any kind of search. If the proof is already there, it's kind of P versus NP things. This would be an NP thing where you would just check the certificate, not look for one. Now the reality is in between, in the sense that what current approaches for automated theorem proving do is to try to draft, use large language models to draft, to draft a proof that is not quite full, so there are still things missing, and then you use, SAT solvers and so on to try and fill the gaps. So the reality is going to be in between there, but ideally, as the AI becomes better, it will suggest, hopefully, more detailed steps that at that point are sufficient for a quick check.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anna, do you have questions?
Yeah, very quick, because I know we're out of time. I was wondering if there is an area within mathematics where you see, stronger potential or easier application of these methods, of these language models.
So I expect this eventually to impact all of mathematics. Now, formalization of mathematics is being easier in certain areas such as algebra and logic, number theory, mostly because it's easier to state things, and it has also been pushed further in very specific narrow directions due to, say, individual efforts. So there is Peter Scholze, who's another Fields medalist, who kind of promoted a large-scale effort of mathematicians and asked them to formalize his theory to check that everything worked out. So that was sort of a larger effort that involved, for example, algebraic geometry. So we are already seeing examples in several areas, and I don't think there will be real boundaries for this.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
Sure.
Okay, so I would like to thank all the attendees, the presenters, for the very excellent presentation, very thought-provoking. So at this point, I would like to again acknowledge also Maggie, who has been here for the symposium. So at this point, we can close because we are already running. Okay, see you at the ceremony at the Italian embassy, I guess.
Excuse me, please. Actually, Maggie is available. She is a panelist. So I'd like to ask her to say a few words. Maggie?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, just like 2 seconds. I just want to, hello, everyone. I'm Maggie Phillips Gerla. This is my younger daughter, Christina, and my older daughter, Marisa. You'll meet us all, and we're looking forward to meeting you all in November in DC. I want to congratulate you all. As usual, our panel, our jury of Elisa and Anna, and this year Nando, thank you so much. Nando's one of our Mario Gerla Award winners of a couple of years ago, have selected an outstanding group as ever. And I think that I just know that my husband Mario would have been so really fascinated with the questions you're addressing, and delighted that you're so passionate about your work, and especially pleased that you're working on the cutting edge of your field internationally. He also would be very happy that you're thinking of the social impacts of your work, and I commend you for that and encourage you to continue that. Thank you again. I'm looking forward to seeing you all soon.
Maggie, thank you again for your very inspiring words. Okay, goodbye to everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye. I'll see you in the city.
Bye.
Bye-bye.